My research explores the boundary area between religion and medicine, focusing on how ideas have evolved over time. Today's topic is From Tradition to Modernity, the translation of Japanese Buddhism and medicine. After this talk, I hope you will have a clear picture of how their relationship developed during Japan's modernization, influenced by both textual sources and cultural changes. So here is outline of my presentation. I have divided it into 5 parts, and 1, before modernization, and 2, modernization of Buddhism and medicine, 3, modern Japanese Buddhism and psychotherapy, and 4, the disappearance of reformers' legacy, and 5, what we can learn from the legacy. At first, let me clarify what I mean by before modernization. In this presentation, I will define the term modernization and explain the situation of Japanese Buddhism and medicine prior to that process. So, for example, let us call it Society A. It has own politics, economy, a way of thinking, technology, industry, and daily life. Over time, these aspects undergo transformation. I refer to this transformation as modernization. So during the modernization of Japanese society, both Buddhism and medicine entered what I call modernized phase. This presentation focuses on the relationship between modernized Japanese Buddhism and modernized Japanese medicine. From 17th to 19th century, during the Edo period, the Edo shogunate cooperated with Buddhist temples and required them to provide funeral services for the nation as a means to stabilize and control the population in Japan. Residents were required to register with a local temple, which would plan their funeral arrangements on death. Since Japan had multiple Buddhist sects and many temples at the time, this system was well suited to support population management in cooperation with the Edo shogunate. At the same time, Buddhist monks and other related practitioners were the main agents of medical study and practice in Japan for a long time before the Edo period. Imports from under Tokugawa trade regulations, so imports from abroad were restricted. Nevertheless, a flourishing publishing culture enabled the wide circulation of medical texts and encouraged research unique to Japan. Various lineages emerged, grounded in prescriptions, acupuncture techniques, and classical analysis, and were transmitted from masters to disciples, a mode long associated with Buddhist teaching, which gradually extended into medical practice beyond the monastic context. So now I will give a brief overview of the history of Japanese medicine. Its development can be divided into several phases. Beginning around the 6th century, Chinese medical texts introduced knowledge and techniques related to internal medicine and acupuncture and moxibustion. Initially, these texts were read like Buddhist scriptures, but they were soon studied more systematically and eventually developed into Japan-specific practices, such as Kanpo and Shinkyu medicine groups. From the 16th century, surgical knowledge and techniques were introduced from Portugal and Spain, forming Namban Ryu or Southern Barbarian style medicine. And later, more advanced surgical methods arrived from the Netherlands, leading to the development of Komo Ryu or red hair style medicine, and developed into Japan-specific Rampo schools or Dutch-style medicine. In this way, Japan medical modernization began after Kanpo, Shinkyu, and Rampo had long coexisted in parallel. So now, let me move on the next section, modernization of Buddhism and medicine. In the early Meiji period, Japan went through confused legal reforms and a rapidly changing religious landscape. At that time, the new concept of religion was introduced, understood as something that consisted of both belief, it having doctrine and faith, and practice, organizing and propagating it. So against this background, a number of reform-minded Buddhists emerged. Most of them were young intellectuals who criticized traditional customs and doctrines and tried to create new modern forms of Buddhism. So they also sought to present Buddhism as a kind of new knowledge. For example, by introducing Zen practices of mental training and breathing methods into the field of psychology. It was a new academic field in Japan. In this context, Christianity was reintroduced, and not only from Europe, but also from the United States. Meanwhile, within Japan, Buddhism evolved as just one, and Shinto became another religion. In other words, the modernization of religion in Japan began when Japanese Buddhism ceased to function as a social system. From that point on, multiple religions coexisted in society, and Japanese Buddhism became just one among them. In 1874, the Meiji government issued the Issei, or the Medical Code 1874. It introduced a licensing system for physicians and pharmacists. So only those who passed the national examination were allowed to practice modern European medicine. So in this way, the new Meiji government did two things. The first, it chose one medical system from among several that existed at the time. And second, it standardized that system as a new modern medicine. As a result, other lineage-based medical traditions, which were not selected, were pushed aside and came to be regarded as non-standard. So now, let us examine the topic of modern Japanese Buddhism and psychotherapy. In the late Meiji period, new ideas and knowledge flowed into Japan from abroad. At the same time, reform-minded Buddhists were developing innovative concepts. Under these combined influences, various individuals began to explore approaches, one of which became known as psychotherapy. For a time, there was a boom in such psychotherapies, to the point where the police intervention was required. However, as the medical system stabilized, the situation gradually settled down. What remained in Japan, however, were two distinct images of psychotherapy. First, a more psychological psychotherapy, and second, a Buddhist-inspired psychotherapy. To understand how these developments took shape, let us look at the types of ideas that entered Japan from abroad, both outside and inside clinical practice. At the time, various theories and techniques arrived from overseas to Japan. From Europe came religious techniques and terminologies such as mesmerism and hypnotism. From the United States came the new thought movement and the activities of the Theosophical Society. These were religious activity. In Japan, these were introduced as new practices, some even linked to healing. This was the situation outside formal clinical medicine. At the same time, new academic disciplines and clinical practices were conveyed from overseas to Japan. From Europe came modernized psychiatry and medical psychology. From the United States came experimental psychology. And from both Europe and the United States came psychoanalysis. These were not external practices, but entered directly into clinical medicine in Japan. So, as an example of the disappearance of the reformer's legacy, I will introduce Morita therapy and Ajase complex. During this boom, the one that even drew police intervention, various forms of hypnosis, occult healing, and other non-standard medical practices were all labeled as psychotherapy. So in clinical settings, however, the demand for standard medical psychotherapies was growing. And Morita Masatake, also known as Morita Shoma, a psychiatrist, investigated these so-called psychotherapies. And Morita concluded that these so-called therapies lacked real clinical efficacy. In response, he developed his own form of medical psychotherapy, which was later accepted into standard clinical practice. It was primarily used to treat what he called the nervous temperament. This therapy is fundamentally grounded in self-acceptance and the practice of engaging in constructive work. To help patients and their families better understand it, Morita often explained his therapy using Buddhist terminology. Thus, while Morita therapy was not directly inspired by Buddhism, it was more readily accepted in society thanks to the influence of modern Buddhist ideas. Around the same time, psychoanalysis was formally introduced into Japan by psychiatrists who had trained in the United States and Germany. This new method, which sought to trace patients' mental symptoms back to their past experiences, was attracting worldwide attention. One key figure was Kosawa Heisaku. He was a psychiatrist who had studied directly under Freud himself. Kosawa focused on Japanese parent-child relationships and sought to adapt Freud's Oedipus complex to fit the Japanese context. Drawing on the legacy of Buddhist reformers, he based his theory of the Ajase complex. Ajase was the Japanese name of King Ajatashatru. So on the well-known tale of King Ajatashatru, without modifying the story. He believed the tale resonated with Japan's social conditions at that time. By contrast, Okonogi Keigo, he was a disciple of Kosawa, who came later, reinterpreted the story to fit modern family dynamics, but without sufficient attention to the original Buddhist scriptures. As a result, his version drew criticism from Buddhist circles in Japan. So, in Greek tragedy, Oedipus kills his father and marries his mother. In Japanese Buddhist tradition, the story of King Ajatashatru, transmitted through Chinese Buddhist scriptures, tells of a prince who kills his father to seize the throne and attempts to kill his mother, who stopped him. The mother opposes him. In the canonical tale, Ajatashatru fell ill with remorse, but the Buddha healed him, and he went on to hear the Buddha's teaching. However, Okonogi twisted the story not found in the scriptures. Ajatashatru felt betrayed, hated his mother, and tried to kill her. This episode has no basis in the scriptures, and his reinterpretation drew criticism from Buddhists, but was ignored. This fictional story was shaped by and reflected the image of the relationship of mother-child at the time in Japan. Finally, I'm reaching the last part of my presentation, what we learn from the legacy toward a balance of medicine and Buddhism. Here we can observe the later development as current status of these two theories. On the left is Morita therapy. Morita himself denied a direct connection with Buddhism. However, over time, its application expanded beyond the treatment of nervous temperament. Later, his successors even developed what came to be called Zen-inspired Morita therapy. It has a direct connection with Zen Buddhism in Japan. On the right is the Ajase complex. Okonogi continued to modify the story, at times adding episodes without clear textual basis. His next version was Ajatasattu's illness did not heal until his mother after practicing under the Buddha. This additional episode was reflected the clinical triangle of the child patient and the mother and the psychiatrist. These changes made the story more useful for interpreting Japanese patient-child relationships. But even today, only the name Ajase from Ajatasattu remains controversial. Nevertheless, both theories continue to be used in clinical settings in Japan. So, what we can learn from these two trajectories? Both approaches hold a place in Japanese clinical practice, but their relationships with Buddhism have been quite distinct. To conclude, I'd like to emphasize the key message of this presentation in the relationship between medicine and Buddhism. It is essential to maintain a good balance between science and religion. So, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation.